I feel like we see extremes presented with travel. Like either you have that like one trip a year that you take, or you have this whole like digital nomad or nomadic life and the full-time travel. And I think that just the in between isn't talked about as much. And so I think that like perspective is really important because, full-time travel is a great option for so many people. But for me personally, and I'm someone who is obsessed with travel, I find that like really tiring and overwhelming as a concept. And I think having roots is also really important to me. So I think there is this balance that you can maintain, but social media kind of glorifies the other, the extreme version of it.
Welcome to the One More Trip podcast, a podcast dedicated to people who want to travel the world with another five. I'm your host Juan, and I'm very excited about this week's conversation because Priyanka Juneja, the host of the Wandering CEO podcast, is joining us to do a deep dive about the country of Georgia. If you've been interested in visiting this transcontinental country, stick to the end because Priyanka is going to help us build a really cool itinerary that is going to expose you to all the things Georgia has to offer. Georgia is a very interesting place. It's caught up in between Eastern Europe and Western Asia and is a place of birth of wine. Like I said earlier, Priyanka is the host of the Wandering CEO podcast. Go to Spotify, Apple Pods, whatever you get your pods. Give it a try, give it a listen. Now, let's start the show.
It's a come along my journey type podcast. And so I am on a journey to building a career that aligns with the life that I want to live. So I dive into themes around personal development, entrepreneurship, and of course, travel. Because for me, building a career to live the life that I want to live includes being able to travel as much as possible. So that's kind of what the podcast focuses on.
What's important for the life that you want to live, and how do you incorporate travel in that? I'm curious about your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, I see travel as something that I find so inspirational and something that I want to be able to just pack up and go and do. And so for me, it's really important to be able to have that flexibility to say like, okay, like I found a flight deal or something and I want to be able to book that trip. And so when I was younger, I think full-time travel was really, really appealing to me. And now that I'm older, I have, a partner and we have our lives together. I really value a home base. But I also love exploring the world, not only solo, but definitely with my fiance. And so I just want to be able to have that opportunity to take however much time as I want to be able to travel.
I think travel has different shades and colors. A lot of people, and I think that's the beauty of it.
Absolutely.
We can make it whatever we want it. But I think what we just said feels so real to me because I value home base as well. But I don't want to stop. And I think we value travel a lot. And out there, when you go and see social media or read blogs about travel, it almost feels like you have to be doing it a nomadic way
100%.
Full time, or you're missing out. I don't know. Do you feel the same way at times?
I definitely feel the same way. In fact, that's something that I want to be able to talk more about on the podcast as well, because I feel like we see extremes presented with travel. Like either you have that like one trip a year that you take, or you have this whole like digital nomad or nomadic life and the full-time travel. And I think that just the in between isn't talked about as much. And so I think that like perspective is really important because, full-time travel is a great option for so many people. But for me personally, and I'm someone who is obsessed with travel, I find that like really tiring and overwhelming as a concept. And I think having roots is also really important to me. So I think there is this balance that you can maintain, but social media kind of glorifies the other, the extreme version of it.
It's exactly. I believe at times it's our human nature also to project a lot, especially in social media. If I'm a little bit hesitant or nervous about a life choice, I quit my job because I didn't like it, pack a bag, and I'm going to travel South America. I feel like the way we present it, or the way it's been presented to me, at least by the algorithm, is I'm making the best choice because I'm quitting my job and I'm moving abroad and I don't know anything, but I'm this is better than staying in a 9 to 5 that leads nowhere. And there is so much in between.
100%.
A shitty job into actually I like what I do and I have a career where I keep it.
Yep.
But also want to travel.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, and I think that that's really not talked about as much.
Right. How do you balance high frequency travel and a career?
Yeah, I think there's seasons to travel. I would say this year I've been more mindful about taking, like quality trips. Like I've really checked off some high ticket items on my bucket list versus like, I think, there have been years where if I see a flight deal and I'm kind of interested, I'm like, okay, let's go. And I like focuses more a little bit on quantity. And so I think that there are seasons to kind of the volume of travel and also balancing that out with career. So for me, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and travel. And so obviously those kind of like go hand in hand. But for a while, when I went back into corporate, while I had unlimited vacation days, I was still being a little bit more cognizant of, okay, I could still take a trip and work on the trip. But for me personally, part of the reason I love to travel so much is because I like to be a bit more disconnected. And so working full time while I'm on a trip isn't as appealing to me personally.
Just to give me an idea, or to give us an idea, how often are you making trips abroad a year?
Yeah. So I would say this year it's been like 5, 6 trips. And there have been times where it'll be, I don't know, 10, like it'll be, quite a bit more. So it just really depends. And it also depends on the length of the trip. I think too, and maybe this is because I'm getting older, before I'd be like, oh yeah, I can go for the weekend and then it doesn't matter. I can come back Monday morning and I'm going to jump right back into things. And that's like less appealing now. So I'm taking maybe fewer trips, but they're longer. I just got back from a 2-week trip. Most of the trips this year actually have been around the 2-week mark.
Exactly. It sounds, and you can let me know if I'm reading this the wrong way. It sounds like you're valuing more quality than quantities.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think too, for me, I have personally honed in on my travel style, and that has shifted quite a bit from when I was younger and trying to figure it out. And also I think your travel style naturally evolves as you evolve. But now I feel like I've really dialed into what I like about travel and like the destinations that appeal to me. And so every trip I'm taking feels like such a quality trip and feels like such a value add.
Let's talk about that for a little.
Sure.
So how does change, let's say, your travel style, how it used to be, how it looks now?
Yeah. So before, I think it was just like I wanted to see everything as much as possible. And I didn't really know how to. I've always been good at planning trips. That being said, I would kind of take advice from different people and I'd be like, oh, okay, this is a must see, so therefore I must see it. And then I would see it and be like, well, actually, I'm like not that interested in that thing. And so there was no reason for me to, spend as much time in my day maybe going to do that. So I think one big shift I've made is to focus on the aspects of travel that are really important to me, which for me personally, I'm really into food. I'm really into wine. I'm really into kind of experiences in travel. And so that was one shift. The second was just taking my time, so more like slow travel. And instead of trying to hop from different places, spending the time to really get to know a place. And I think that has changed because I now have this mentality of even if I don't plan on returning to a place, I approach a place as if I'm going to return. And I think that kind of quiets down that noise of needing to see everything all at once because it's just impossible to do that, of course. And that really helps kind of take my time and prioritize things. And so even if I'm not going to return, that mentality just at least helps me not be anxious and be like, oh, I have all these like things I want to do and this whole list that I need to check off. So I think that's really and just improved how I travel.
Yeah, that's such a mature way to approach it. When I meet people traveling or my friends here at home, their approach tends to be at times very like a grocery shopping list. It's
Totally.
checking boxes and seeing as much as you can. Nothing against it. I think everyone should just do whatever they want, but definitely not for me. I think you're bringing a good concept, which is a slow travel. Mm-hmm. What is the minimum nights you spend in a place?
Yeah, so I'd say the bare minimum for me is usually 3 nights. Anything less than that feels really, really rushed. And that, again, is a huge shift from when I was younger, which I get, right? You have more energy too. And I was staying in hostels and I was backpacking and doing all the things. But yeah, now it's minimum of 3 nights.
That's awesome. I'm similar. I think at 2 nights for me. So I think the more I talk to you, the more I see that we're very aligned in many
It definitely
ways.
Sounds like that, yeah.
Let's take it to day one. When did you where did you take your first trip and what was the motivation?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting for me is I don't even remember the first time I traveled because I'm Indian by heritage, but I was born here in the States. And so when I was, I don't know, a year old, 2 years old, that was my first trip to India. And so growing up, it was really interesting because I would have these annual trips to India to go home, see the family. And I'm from a small town in South Carolina. And so the juxtaposition of India with South Carolina, I think really piqued my interest in travel early on because I was like, okay, if these two places are so different and I'm having these experiences, where else can I go? And so my first trip actually that wasn't India, it was a school field trip to Costa Rica. So that was the first one. And then after that, I just kind of started planning things myself. We did a trip to Turkey, to Laos, to Thailand. All of that was in high school.
Wow. I'm very intimidated by that trip, and I'm 36. I cannot imagine planning the trip. So did you just do that yourself, or it was a group of people? How'd it go?
Yeah, I was gonna say, to be fair, all of those we had a reason to go there. So the trip that we did to Turkey, I went with my family, and it's because our family friend had their daughter lived there. So she was able to take us around. And the same thing with Thailand and Laos. We had family friends and connections there. But I think like in my family, I've always been kind of the one to push to be like, okay, can we like go? Can we do more? Can we see more? And even with those trips to India back then, there wasn't a direct flight. So generally speaking, we'd have to have a stopover in Europe, and we would do those trips and just like have that 2 hour stopover and continue on. And one year I was basically like, okay, like, can we not just like actually spend a few days here? And so that's been kind of the driving factor to see like, how can I incorporate trips into the trips that we're already taking?
That's great that your family was open to, I guess, I don't know how open they were at the beginning, but it sounds like you eventually got them to broaden their vision and say, maybe we can spend time in Europe and then go home for family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been nice to see kind of their growth and interest in travel as well. I mean, my parents now take so many different trips than they ever would, because I don't think they really thought about it more, outside of just like trips back home, which I get, right? They have family, they have so many people they need to see. So it's been nice. And even for my sisters, who are both really, really into travel now, I definitely kind of nudged them along in places. Like I told my younger sister, I was like, you have to study abroad. That's it. You have to study abroad. And I'm actually going to tell you where you're studying abroad. And then she took a gap year, and I was like, this is where you're going.
You're contagious. Your energy and your approach to travel is contagious. I think it makes total sense. That when you mentioned earlier, you have some entrepreneurship ideas. Are they related to travel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually had a travel startup a couple of years ago, and it was really focused on empowering women to travel more. And since then I've exited that, but I still have very similar notions. So right now I have two things. I have my travel blog, and that's focused on an elevated adventure. It's called Champagne Flight. And that's basically kind of what we were talking about, like more of the slow travel, the foodie experiences, wine regions off the beaten path. So taking your trips to the next level. And then I have the podcast, So Wandering CEO. And the whole goal with that podcast is to build a community, mostly of women, to kind of who are interested in travel, interested in food, and also interested in this, what we talked about, that balance of where they have this career, but they still want to be able to travel as much as possible. And so one day I'd love to do, group trips or, have a digital community. I think there's so many different ways to take that, but it's been a really fun journey so far.
That's amazing. It's so inspiring hearing that you have so much energy for something, and it goes beyond a hobby. It goes beyond something I do on my vacation days, and you're constantly thinking, and my wife calls it scheming, on how the community side of things.
Yes.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think
especially women supporting women.
I think it's really important. The community side of things it's really important, not only in travel but also in entrepreneurship, because that can be lonely. And I think there can be this intersection for that type of community where you can value entrepreneurship, career-minded, all of that, and then still want to travel.
You mentioned 3 times you like wine.
Yes.
And you just mentioned something that piqued my interest heavily, which is off the beaten path. I think that's an idiom, right? What's the off-beaten path that is really good wine, culinary, intuitive place? What comes to mind?
Georgia. Absolutely. It's my new favorite country, and it has everything. It has wine, it has food, great food. I mean, my fiance and I were talking about it last night. We just want some Georgian food, and the hospitality in Georgia is out of this world. It's beautiful. It's the best off the beaten path place for wine.
What's the connection in Georgia with wine? I'm very ignorant, and I don't know much about it other than and I think where it is located in the flag. That's all I know.
Yeah, so it's actually the birthplace of wine. It is the oldest place in the world where they discovered wine. And so what's funny is my connection to Georgia is so random. I think years ago, and maybe you can connect with this too, maybe you have experiences like this, but I think I saw a photo of the country, and it was like, this is so beautiful. And I started looking into it so much more. And I'd never heard of anyone who went to Georgia. I'd most people didn't even know that was a country. And so when I went to grad school, I still had this huge interest in Georgia. And I did a dual master. And for the second master's, we had to do a thesis. And so we did a group thesis, and it was around decentralizing tourism. And I specifically picked Georgia because we were supposed to be able to travel to do field research. And then, of course, pandemic happened. So I still wasn't able to go to Georgia, but I did my thesis on wine and how that's impacted kind of, the decentralizing the tourism and really helped their tourism industry. And then finally, this year for my birthday, we went to Georgia, and that's actually where my fiance proposed. So it's now my, such a special place in my heart.
That was very special. Sounds like an incredible thing that is a recurring topic. Like you said, I would agree. Georgia, not really the first destination most people have. Any culture shocks, any experience with the way Georgians approach life?
Yeah, so I think what's really one of the things that we picked up in Georgia, so this is something that my fiance and I tend to do, consciously or subconsciously, is we usually experience something that's a part of the culture and then bring that back with us and kind of integrate that. And so one thing that we really loved about Georgia, and kind of tying that into wine as well, is they have this concept of toast, and they have a toast master. They're very serious about their toast. So it's not like, here in the US, when you make a toast, it's usually like a special occasion, or, you might just say cheers. But when we were in Georgia, we would be, at a winery with this Georgian winemaker. He doesn't speak a word of English, but every time he'd refill our glasses, he would give this beautiful toast that our, driver then translated for us. And it was just this like really beautiful, intentional way that people kind of value their friends, the time you're spending together, and making wine such a part of, community building and culture. And we just absolutely love that. So now we brought that back. And anytime we, have a new drink with friends, we kind of like make a toast. And so I think that's a really beautiful part of the culture, and why I think wine and food are such great ways to get an insight into local culture, because wine means so much to Georgia, especially because their winemaking process is completely different than, what you're used to around the world. And it's tied so much into their history and their culture. So that was something I just loved.
That's the two great points, right? Wine and food really reflect the culture of a place. It's an X-ray. You can really see how people think about stuff based on their food. And now wine, I think it's part of it as a process. What's different between the way they make wine in Georgia versus, I don't know, France?
So in France or Italy, they make them in, the stainless steel tanks. In Georgia, the traditional process is using a qvevri. So it's basically a massive clay vessel that's underground that you put the wine in and then cover that. And that's like their winemaking process is actually in this massive clay qvevri. And they also put everything in there. So it's not just the grapes, the seeds, the skin. They'll put the twigs, everything will go into that. And it really makes the flavor just completely unique. It'll be wine you've never really tasted before. It was definitely something the first time I tried it, I was like, oh, this is really, really unique. And now it's something that I'm always looking for, like a qvevri wine from Georgia. They're harder to find, of course, outside, because I think that just storing them, there's nothing added into them as well. But what's beautiful about that winemaking process is that's how it was done. So when they first found wine, the origin of wine, they found it in a qvevri. And then that tradition of winemaking got lost when Georgia was Soviet occupied, because that was then, the Soviets were more focused on just wine production. And so that technique and that culture is lost. And so when we went to Georgia, what was really beautiful is there's all these winemakers who are bringing that back, or who have read, maybe accounts from their ancestors on how to make wine. And so I think that makes it extra special, because it's this beautiful part of their culture that they're bringing back, and just a very unique way to make wine.
People agree that we need to bring it back, whatever that is, and then expose the world to something that was hidden or was forgotten. Now we have access to it. I feel like the luckiest person when I get access to anything like that.
Absolutely.
So if anyone is interested in going to Georgia, how long would you recommend?
So I would say 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks minimum, I would say, just because it's kind of hard to get to as well. And if you're really interested in wine, it gives you the time to spend time in Tbilisi, which is just a really cool, eclectic city, and then actually get to the wine area. It's not far from Tbilisi, but there's, a lot to see. And then there's so many other parts of Georgia. I mean, we just scratched the surface, really, and we could have easily spent, so much more time. And again, hospitality is great. They're so welcoming, so excited to have you there, and excited to share their culture and their traditions. And the food is So good. It's absolutely incredible.
What are the key components of Georgian cuisine?
Yeah, so Georgia has an abundance of different types of crops that they're able to grow. I think that's why they've been, kind of the source of so many people trying to occupy them. But you can really find, I mean, everything. So I'm a vegetarian, and a lot of their food is naturally vegetarian. There's a lot of walnut-based things, eggplant-based things, a lot of cheese. One of my favorite things that they do are Georgian dumplings, and so they're bigger than I think you would normally consider dumplings, the size. But one of the best ones they do is with potato and cheese. They do a really good one with mushrooms too, and it's like the best hangover food. And you just have that and like maybe a beer, and it's really great.
That's such a great point, because if you're a wine and you invented wine, you also have to have hangover food match expertise. That's so interesting. And let's see, like a very loose itinerary. What cities would you recommend visiting?
Yeah, so I think a great first timers trip for someone who's also interested in wine would be to land in Tbilisi, spend a few days there. So maybe, 3 nights, maybe you can tack on some towards the end of the trip as well. And then what we did is we found a driver who is also an expert in wine. And we drove Tbilisi to Kakheti, which is the wine area. And so I would recommend at least 3 nights there as well. You can split your time between different parts. You could stay at a winery. At least 3 nights, you could easily spend much longer. And then if possible, what I would also add into your itinerary is Kazbegi. And that is, if you Google images of Georgia, it's that beautiful mountain kind of range. And that's a really unique element to add to your trip as well, because then you just get completely different, landscape and geography too. It is a little bit harder to get to. So if you couldn't add it to your first trip and you wanted to just spend time in Tbilisi and Kakheti, I think that's totally possible. But I would say, maybe 3 nights Tbilisi, a few nights in Kakheti, and then you could do 2 nights in Kazbegi.
Awesome. And you mentioned you have a blog. I'm pretty sure you have a couple of really key information.
Yes, I definitely do. So the blog is called champagneflight.com. Yeah.
Love the name. Yeah, and very catchy. Yep. So if anyone is listening and wants to really go in details, I only hope that will inspire someone to consider Georgia as the travel destination.
Yeah, I hope so.
But I ask every single person, where is your next trip?
So I actually don't have my next trip planned. Well, that's not true. I am going to India at the end of January, and that's for wedding dress shopping. And the reason I don't have my next trip planned is because we're getting married in Greece in next September. So I haven't figured out what I'm going to do in between those 2 trips. But of course, those are both trips. So India and Greece are upcoming, but we'll see what goes in between those.
Yeah, 2024 for you is going to be very eventful.
Yeah.
So definitely that takes priority.
Yeah. I'm very excited.
Amazing. Well, it's been a great time talking to you, getting to know you a little bit better. If anyone wants to learn more about you, more about your business, your ideas, where they can find you.
Yeah, so definitely come say hi to me on Instagram. I'm at p.s.juneja, my last name, which is Juneja. And then, of course, you can connect through the blog, Champagne Flight, or through the podcast, which is Wandering CEO. And that's available everywhere you listen to podcasts.
Perfect. It's been a great time. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
A special thanks to Shane Ivers for playing the music. You can find more music by Shane at silvermansound.com. Pulsar 2017 by Shane Ivers is licensed under CC BY 4.0.